My boyfriend faked his death, framed me for theft, and vanished. 2 years later, he reappeared, asking me to forgive him and marry him. The first time I died was on October 15, 2021, when Marcus Rivera supposedly drowned in Lake Minnetonka during what should have been a romantic weekend getaway. I know that sounds strange, saying, I died when it was really my boyfriend who supposedly died, but losing Marcus felt like losing a part of myself so fundamental that the person I'd been before simply ceased to exist. Marcus and I had been together for 3 years, living in Minneapolis, and our relationship had reached that comfortable, settled phase where marriage felt inevitable rather than exciting. We'd moved in together the previous year, merged our finances to save for a house, and talked casually about wedding venues and baby names as if our future together was as certain as gravity. I want to take you somewhere special this weekend, Marcus had said on that Wednesday evening, surprising me with an overnight bag already packed and sitting by our apartment door. Just you and me, no phones, no distractions. I have something important I want to talk to you about. I assumed he was planning to propose. The timing felt right, the romantic setup was classic Marcus, and he'd been acting slightly nervous and secretive for the past few weeks in a way that suggested he was planning something significant. When he suggested we rent a cabin on Lake Minnetonka, one of our favorite weekend destinations, I was certain I'd be coming home with an engagement ring. The cabin was perfect, rustic but comfortable, with a private dock and a view of the lake that looked like something from a postcard. Marcus seemed more relaxed than he'd been in weeks, cooking dinner for us, opening a bottle of wine, and talking about his plans for the marketing consulting business he'd been developing as a side project. I think I'm ready to quit my day job and go full-time with the consulting, he told me as we sat on the dock watching the sunset. I've got enough clients lined up to make it work, and I'm tired of working for other people who don't appreciate what I bring to the table. That's a big step, I said, though I supported his entrepreneurial ambitions. Marcus was brilliant at marketing strategy, and his side business had been growing steadily for the past year. Are you sure the finances will work out? More than sure, he replied, squeezing my hand. I've been planning this for months, Sarah. Everything's going to change soon, and I wanted to spend this weekend just enjoying what we have before life gets crazy. That night, we made love with an intensity that felt both familiar and somehow final, as if Marcus was trying to memorize every detail of our physical connection. In the morning, he suggested we take the rental kayaks out for a peaceful paddle around the lake before heading back to the city. You go first, he said, helping me into my kayak. I want to grab my camera and take some pictures of you on the water. You look beautiful out there. I paddled about 50 yards from shore, turned back to wave at Marcus, and watched him climb into his own kayak with his waterproof camera bag. The October morning was crisp but sunny, perfect for being on the water, and I felt that particular contentment that comes from being completely happy with your life and the person you're sharing it with. 20 minutes later, Marcus's empty kayak washed up on the opposite shore of the small bay where we'd been paddling. His camera bag was floating nearby, and his life jacket was found tangled in some underwater vegetation about 30 feet from where his kayak had apparently capsized. Sarah, where's your boyfriend? Called out a man from another rental cabin who'd witnessed Marcus's kayak floating empty. Did you see what happened to him? The search and rescue operation that followed was extensive and professional, involving divers, boats, helicopters, and volunteers from 3 counties. Lake Minnetonka was relatively shallow in most areas, but it had deep pockets and underwater currents that could trap a body for weeks or months. The water temperature is about 55 degrees, the lead dive coordinator explained to me as I sat in a blanket on the shore, watching teams of rescuers search for any sign of Marcus. Hypothermia would set in quickly if he was in the water without his life jacket. We're hoping to find him soon. But they didn't find him that day, or the next day, or in the weeks that followed. Marcus Rivera had simply vanished into Lake Minnetonka, leaving behind a grieving girlfriend, a rental kayak, and a mystery that would eventually destroy my life in ways I never could have imagined. The funeral was held 3 weeks later, despite the fact that we had no body to bury. Marcus's parents, Elena and Roberto, flew in from Phoenix and worked with me to plan a memorial service that celebrated his life while acknowledging the tragic circumstances of his disappearance. He loved you so much, Sarah, Elena told me as we selected photos for the memorial slideshow. You made him happier than we'd ever seen him. I know he would have proposed to you soon if this hadn't happened. The service was beautiful and heartbreaking, filled with friends and colleagues who shared stories about Marcus's kindness, his business acumen, and his plans for the future. I gave a eulogy that I barely remember delivering, something about how Marcus had taught me to take risks and dream bigger than I'd ever thought possible. What I remember most clearly is the overwhelming emptiness that followed everyone going home and life supposedly returning to normal. Our shared apartment felt like a museum of our relationship, filled with Marcus's clothes, his business files, and the future plans we'd made together that would never be realized. The practical aspects of dealing with his disappearance were almost as devastating as the emotional ones. Because no body had been recovered, Marcus was classified as missing rather than deceased, which complicated everything from insurance claims to closing his business accounts. I spent months navigating bureaucratic nightmares while trying to grieve someone who might technically still be alive somewhere. The law requires a 7-year waiting period before someone can be declared legally dead without a body, the lawyer handling Marcus's estate explained to me. In the meantime, you'll need court orders to access most of his accounts or settle his affairs. The process of trying to access our shared financial accounts revealed the first hint that something was wrong with the story I'd been told about Marcus's drowning. When I tried to withdraw money from our joint savings account to pay rent, I discovered that the account had been emptied 3 days before our trip to Lake Minnetonka. I'm sorry, Ms. Chen, but the account shows a withdrawal of $47,000 on October 12, the bank manager informed me. The transaction was authorized with Mr. Rivera's PIN and identification. That's impossible, I said, staring at the account statement. Marcus was at work on October 12. We were together that evening. When would he have withdrawn that money, and why wouldn't he tell me about it? The withdrawal was made at our downtown branch at 2:30 p.m., the manager explained. Perhaps Mr. Rivera had a reason for the transaction that he hadn't discussed with you yet. $47,000 was everything we'd saved together for our house down payment, our emergency fund, and the money Marcus had set aside to fund his consulting business. It represented 3 years of careful budgeting and shared financial goals, and now it was simply gone. Over the next few weeks, I discovered that Marcus had liquidated other accounts as well. His business checking account had been emptied, his 401k had been cashed out with penalties, and even his expensive camera equipment had been sold to a pawn shop the week before our trip. It looks like your boyfriend was converting all his assets to cash in the days before his disappearance, Detective Lisa Park told me when I reported the financial irregularities. Do you have any idea why he might have been doing that? None at all, I replied honestly. Marcus never mentioned money problems or any reason he'd need that much cash. We were planning to buy a house together. Why would he liquidate our savings without telling me? Detective Park's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the suspicion in her eyes. Ms. Chen, I have to ask, did you and Mr. Rivera have any arguments or relationship problems that might have motivated him to take steps to protect his assets? Protect his assets from what? From me? I was incredulous. We were planning to get married. We shared everything. There was no reason for him to hide money from me. But even as I said it, I was starting to wonder if I'd really known Marcus as well as I thought I had. The man I'd loved and trusted had apparently liquidated our entire financial life in secret, then disappeared under circumstances that were starting to look less like a tragic accident and more like an elaborate escape plan. The investigation into Marcus's disappearance took a devastating turn 6 weeks later when Detective Park called to tell me that I needed to come to the police station for additional questioning. We've discovered some irregularities in your story about the day Mr. Rivera disappeared, she told me when I arrived at the station. There are some inconsistencies we need to clear up. What kind of inconsistencies? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling that I was about to learn something that would make everything even worse. Security footage from the marina shows you and Mr. Rivera arriving together on October 15, but it also shows you leaving alone approximately 3 hours later, Detective Park explained. You told us initially that you stayed at the lake searching for Mr. Rivera until rescue teams arrived, but the footage contradicts that timeline. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. That's impossible. I never left the lake. I was there when the other cabin renter found Marcus's empty kayak. I was there when the rescue teams arrived. Miss Chen, we have clear footage of you loading bags into your car and driving away from the marina at 11:30 a.m. on October 15th. The emergency call about the missing kayaker wasn't placed until 2:15 p.m. The room seemed to tilt sideways as I realized that my memories of that day didn't match the evidence. Either I was losing my mind, or someone had manipulated the situation in ways I couldn't understand. I don't remember leaving the lake, I said slowly. I remember Marcus getting into his kayak, and then I remember the other cabin renter asking me where he was. I don't remember anything in between. Miss Chen, we also found Mr. Rivera's camera in your car when we searched it yesterday, Detective Park continued. The camera that was supposedly in his waterproof bag when he drowned. You searched my car? Why would Marcus's camera be in my car? That's what we're trying to determine. Along with why you had Mr. Rivera's laptop, his passport, and several other personal items that should have been with him if he actually drowned in the lake. The interrogation that followed was the most terrifying experience of my life. Detective Park and her partner presented evidence that painted me as someone who had murdered my boyfriend and staged his drowning to cover up the crime. The missing money, the inconsistent timeline, the personal items found in my car. Everything pointed to my involvement in Marcus's disappearance. Here's what we think happened, Detective Park said. You and Mr. Rivera had a fight about money. Maybe you discovered he was planning to leave you. Maybe you found out about the liquidated accounts. You went to the lake together, but only you came back. You staged the scene with the empty kayak and the life jacket, then drove home with his personal belongings, planning to claim he'd drowned. That's insane, I protested. I loved Marcus. I would never hurt him. And I had no idea about the missing money until weeks after he disappeared. Miss Chen, you're the only person who was with Mr. Rivera when he allegedly drowned. You're the only person who could have placed his belongings in your car. And you're the only person who benefits from his disappearance, Detective Park replied. The evidence points to your involvement in whatever happened to him. I was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and theft of the liquidated assets that had supposedly been in my possession. The media coverage of my arrest was brutal, painting me as a cold-blooded killer who had murdered her boyfriend for money and tried to cover it up with an elaborate fake drowning. Girlfriend arrested in Lake Minnetonka murder, read the headlines. Woman accused of killing boyfriend for $50,000. The trial was a nightmare that lasted 8 months and cost me everything I'd built in my adult life. My court-appointed attorney, David Reeves, did his best with limited resources, but the evidence against me was overwhelming and circumstantial in ways that were difficult to refute. The prosecution's case is strong, he told me honestly. They have motive, opportunity, and physical evidence placing you at the scene with Rivera's personal belongings. Our best strategy is to argue that someone else staged this to frame you, but we need evidence to support that theory. Someone did stage this to frame me, I insisted. Marcus is alive somewhere, and he's letting me take the blame for his disappearance. But I don't know how to prove it. Sarah, if Marcus Rivera is alive, where is he? Why would he fake his own death and frame you for murder? What would he gain from destroying your life? I couldn't answer those questions, which made my defense strategy virtually impossible to execute. The idea that Marcus had faked his death and framed me required a level of premeditation and cruelty that seemed incompatible with the man I'd loved and trusted. But the alternative, that I had murdered him and somehow suppressed all memory of the crime, seemed equally impossible. The prosecution's case painted me as a woman who had discovered her boyfriend was planning to leave her and take their shared assets with him. In their version of events, I had confronted Marcus at the lake, killed him during an argument, disposed of his body, and staged the drowning scene to avoid suspicion. Sarah Chen was facing the complete destruction of her future plans, prosecutor Jennifer Walsh argued in her closing statement. The man she expected to marry was liquidating their shared assets and preparing to disappear from her life. She couldn't accept that reality, so she made sure it would never happen. The physical evidence was damning. Marcus's belongings in my car, my unexplained absence from the lake during the critical time period, my fingerprints on his liquidated account paperwork that I couldn't remember handling. Everything pointed to my guilt, even though I had no memory of committing any crime. The defendant claims to have no memory of the period between 11:30 a.m. and 2:15 p.m. on October 15, Walsh continued. But memory loss is a common psychological response to traumatic events, including traumatic events that we cause ourselves. My own testimony was weak and confused because I genuinely couldn't explain the evidence against me. I remembered loving Marcus, I remembered planning to spend my life with him, I remembered the devastation of losing him. But I couldn't remember killing him, staging his death, or taking his belongings, and my inability to account for those actions made me look either guilty or delusional. Sarah, you have to understand how this looks to a jury, David explained during one of our trial preparation sessions. You can't explain the evidence, you can't account for your actions during the critical time period, and your only defense is that someone else must have framed you. That's not enough for reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before finding me guilty of second-degree murder and grand theft. I was sentenced to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years if I demonstrated remorse and accepted responsibility for my crimes. Ms. Chen, the evidence in this case is overwhelming, Judge Patricia Morrison said during sentencing. You took the life of someone who trusted you, then tried to cover up your crime with an elaborate deception. The court hopes that your time in prison will give you the opportunity to reflect on your actions and find genuine remorse for the pain you've caused. I served 2 years at the Shakopee Correctional Facility, maintaining my innocence while participating in the counseling and rehabilitation programs that might eventually qualify me for early parole. Other inmates and staff treated me with the mixture of sympathy and suspicion reserved for people who claim to be wrongfully convicted. Some believed my protestations of innocence, while others saw them as evidence that I hadn't accepted responsibility for my crime. You're never going to get parole if you keep insisting you didn't do it, my cellmate Angela advised me during one of our late-night conversations. The parole board wants to see remorse and acceptance of responsibility. Claiming you were framed just makes you look like you're in denial. But I was framed, I replied. I don't know how to show remorse for something I didn't do. Then you're going to serve your full sentence, Angela said bluntly. Because the system doesn't care whether you're actually guilty. It cares whether you're willing to play by the rules of rehabilitation and redemption. The possibility of early parole became academic in March 2024, when my conviction was overturned by the Minnesota Court of Appeals based on new evidence that had emerged during a cold case review of Marcus's disappearance. Ms. Chen, I'm calling to inform you that charges against you are being dropped, my new attorney, Rebecca Martinez, told me during a phone call that changed everything. Marcus Rivera has been found alive, and he's confessed to staging his death and framing you for his murder. The words didn't seem real at first. After 2 years of insisting on my innocence while everyone around me believed I was a killer, the idea that Marcus was actually alive felt like a fantasy I'd invented to cope with my situation. Where has he been? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Costa Rica, apparently. He's been living under a false identity, running a small hotel business with the money he liquidated from your shared accounts. He was arrested 3 weeks ago on an unrelated fraud charge, and during questioning, he admitted to faking his death and framing you. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would he do that to me? According to his statement, he was in debt to some dangerous people in Minneapolis and needed to disappear quickly. He thought framing you for his murder would give him time to establish a new identity without anyone looking for him. The release process took another week while paperwork was completed and my conviction was formally vacated. Walking out of Shakopee Correctional Facility as a free woman felt surreal, like waking up from a nightmare to discover that reality was somehow even stranger than the dream. The media attention surrounding my release was intense but more sympathetic than the coverage of my original arrest. I was now the victim of an elaborate frame-up rather than a cold-blooded killer, and public opinion shifted dramatically in my favor. Woman wrongfully imprisoned after boyfriend fakes death, read the headlines. 2 years lost. Innocent woman freed after partner's cruel deception. But public sympathy couldn't give me back the 2 years I'd lost in prison, the reputation that had been destroyed, or the life I'd been building before Marcus's disappearance. I was free, but I was also unemployed, homeless, and struggling with the psychological aftermath of being wrongfully convicted for a crime that had never actually occurred. Readjusting to life after wrongful imprisonment is a process that takes time, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, the therapist I started seeing immediately after my release. You've experienced multiple traumas, the apparent loss of someone you loved, the betrayal of being framed, the injustice of wrongful conviction. Recovery won't happen overnight. I was staying in a halfway house for recently released inmates while I tried to rebuild my life from nothing. The state of Minnesota was processing a compensation claim for my wrongful imprisonment, but that money wouldn't arrive for months. In the meantime, I had to find work, housing, and some way to move forward with a life that had been completely derailed by someone else's elaborate deception. That's when Marcus reappeared. The knock on my door came on a Tuesday evening in April, 3 weeks after my release from prison. I opened the door expecting to see another journalist or legal advocate, but instead found myself face to face with the man whose supposed death had destroyed my life and whose confession had recently saved it. Marcus looked older and thinner than I remembered, with a deep tan that suggested he'd indeed been living somewhere tropical. He was holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing the same sheepish expression he'd used in our relationship when he'd done something wrong and wanted forgiveness. "Hi, Sarah," he said, as if we were former college friends running into each other at a coffee shop rather than victim and perpetrator of an elaborate fraud. "I know this is probably a shock, but I was hoping we could talk." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to process the reality of his presence on my doorstep. This was the man I'd mourned, the man I'd been convicted of murdering, the man whose confession had freed me from prison. Seeing him alive and standing in front of me felt like encountering a ghost, except ghosts don't usually bring flowers and ask for conversation. "What do you want, Marcus?" I asked, not inviting him inside. "I want to apologize," he said earnestly. "I want to explain what happened, why I did what I did, and how sorry I am about everything you went through because of my choices." "You want to apologize for faking your death and letting me spend 2 years in prison for your murder?" "Yes. And I want to ask if there's any chance you could forgive me." The audacity of the request was breathtaking. Marcus had deliberately and systematically destroyed my life, allowed me to be convicted of a crime that had never occurred, and now he was standing on my doorstep asking for forgiveness as if he'd simply forgotten to call on my birthday. "You think I should forgive you?" I asked, my voice rising with incredulity. "You think there's any universe where what you did to me is forgivable?" "I know how it sounds," Marcus said quickly. "But Sarah, I never intended for you to be arrested. I thought the drowning would be ruled an accident, and you'd be free to move on with your life. When I found out you'd been charged with murder, I wanted to come forward, but I was scared of the people I was hiding from. So you let me rot in prison instead." "I was trying to find a way to clear your name without getting myself killed," he insisted. "The people I owed money to aren't the kind of people you can reason with. I needed time to figure out how to fix this situation safely." "And it took you 2 years to figure that out?" Marcus looked down at his feet, suddenly less confident in his explanation. "The truth is, I got comfortable in Costa Rica. I built a new life, started a business, met new people. I convinced myself that you'd be okay, that the justice system would figure out you were innocent. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." "You were a coward," I agreed. "You were also a criminal who committed multiple felonies and destroyed an innocent person's life to save yourself from the consequences of your own bad decisions." "You're right," Marcus said. "You're absolutely right about all of that. But Sarah, I love you. I've always loved you. Everything I did was stupid and selfish, but it wasn't because I stopped caring about you." The declaration of love was somehow more offensive than his attempt at justification. How could someone claim to love a person while simultaneously destroying their life for personal convenience? "If you loved me, you wouldn't have framed me for murder," I said simply. "If you loved me, you would have found a way to clear my name that didn't require waiting until you were arrested for an unrelated crime." "I know," Marcus said, and for the first time, his voice carried what sounded like genuine remorse. "I know I failed you in every possible way. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I'm hoping that maybe, over time, we could find a way to rebuild what we had." "Rebuild what we had?" I repeated. "Marcus, what we had was based on lies. You were planning to disappear from my life before you faked your death. You liquidated our shared assets, you created an elaborate escape plan, and you were apparently in debt to dangerous people, none of which you ever told me. I was trying to protect you from my problems. You were lying to me about fundamental aspects of your life while planning to abandon me without explanation. Marcus was quiet for a moment, perhaps finally beginning to understand that his actions had revealed the relationship I thought we'd shared had never actually existed. Sarah, he said finally, I know I have no right to ask this, but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to prove that I've changed. I've spent 2 years thinking about what I lost when I lost you. I know how to be better now. You lost me when you chose to fake your death rather than trust me with the truth about your problems, I replied. You lost me when you decided my life was expendable if it meant protecting yours. You lost me when you let me spend 2 years in prison for a crime that never happened. I can make it up to you, Marcus said desperately. I have money now, from the business in Costa Rica. I can help you rebuild your life, get you back on your feet. We could start over somewhere new, leave all this behind us. With money you made using funds you stole from our shared accounts? With money I earned building a legitimate business, he corrected. Sarah, I'm not the same person who made those terrible decisions 2 years ago. I've learned from my mistakes, and I want to spend the rest of my life making things right between us. I studied his face, looking for any sign of the man I'd once loved and trusted completely. But all I could see was someone who'd proven himself capable of elaborate deception and casual cruelty, someone who'd destroyed my life and now expected gratitude for eventually telling the truth. Marcus, I said slowly, I don't think you understand what you took from me. You didn't just steal money or cause me legal problems. You stole 2 years of my life, my reputation, my sense of safety, my ability to trust my own judgment. You made me doubt my own sanity when I couldn't explain the evidence against me. I know. You made my family believe I was a murderer. You made my friends question everything they thought they knew about my character. You destroyed relationships that took decades to build, and some of them will never be repaired. Marcus listened silently, perhaps finally beginning to comprehend the scope of damage his actions had caused. Most of all, I continued, you taught me that the person I loved most in the world, the person I trusted completely, was capable of betraying me in ways I never could have imagined. That's not something you can apologize away or make up for with money. So there's no chance, he asked quietly? No possibility that we could ever find our way back to each other? The people who could have found their way back to each other don't exist anymore, I replied. The Sarah who loved you died when you faked your death. The Marcus I loved never existed in the first place. That's not true. The love we shared was real, even if I made terrible choices afterward. Was it real, Marcus? Because someone who truly loved me wouldn't have been planning to disappear from my life without explanation. Someone who truly loved me wouldn't have let me be convicted of murder rather than risk his own safety. Someone who truly loved me wouldn't be standing on my doorstep asking for forgiveness after destroying everything I cared about. Marcus stood there for another minute, perhaps hoping I would change my mind or soften my position. When it became clear that wasn't going to happen, he set the flowers down beside my door and turned to leave. I really am sorry, Sarah, he said without looking back. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I needed you to know. Your sorrow doesn't give me back the 2 years I lost in prison, I replied. It doesn't repair the relationships you destroyed or restore the trust you violated. Your sorrow is about your own guilt, not about the damage you caused me. After he left, I sat in my small room at the halfway house and tried to process the encounter. Marcus's reappearance had confirmed what I'd suspected during our relationship's final weeks. That the man I'd planned to marry had been living a double life, keeping secrets that he'd eventually use to destroy me rather than trusting me with the truth. The proposal he'd apparently been planning during our trip to Lake Minnetonka had been a lie, just like his claims of love and his requests for forgiveness. Marcus was someone who said whatever he thought people wanted to hear, regardless of whether he meant it or could follow through on his promises. How do you feel about seeing him again? Dr. Kim asked during our next therapy session. Relieved, I said, surprising myself with the answer. For 2 years, I've been wondering if I was crazy, if I'd somehow suppressed memories of murdering someone I loved. Seeing him alive and hearing him admit to framing me confirms that my memories were accurate and my innocence was real. And how do you feel about his request for forgiveness? Like he still doesn't understand what he did to me. He's focused on his own guilt and his desire to feel better about his choices. He's not thinking about what I need to heal from the trauma he caused. What do you need to heal? Time, I said immediately. Distance from him and everyone connected to this situation. The chance to build a new life based on truth rather than lies. And probably a lot more therapy to work through the trust issues this experience has created. Those sound like reasonable goals, Dr. Kim agreed. Healing from this kind of betrayal is a process that can't be rushed or shortcut by someone else's apologies. Today, 8 months after Marcus's reappearance, I'm slowly rebuilding my life in Seattle, far from Minneapolis and the memories associated with our relationship. The state compensation for my wrongful imprisonment has allowed me to start over financially, and I'm working as a freelance graphic designer while taking classes to update my skills after 2 years away from the workforce. I've had no contact with Marcus since that evening when he appeared at my door with flowers and apologies. Through mutual friends, I've heard that he's moved back to Phoenix to be closer to his family, but I've made it clear that I don't want updates about his life or attempts at further communication. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, I told my sister when she suggested that I might eventually want closure through conversation with Marcus. Some damage can't be repaired by the person who caused it. But don't you think forgiveness might help you move on? She asked. I have moved on, I replied. Moving on doesn't require forgiving someone who destroyed your life. It just requires building a new life that's better than what they took from you. The new life I'm building is smaller and more cautious than the one I had before Marcus's betrayal, but it's also more authentic. I'm more careful about trusting people, more protective of my resources and my heart, more aware of the warning signs that suggest someone might not be who they claim to be. Do you think you'll ever be able to love someone completely again? Dr. Kim asked during one of our sessions. I don't know, I answered honestly. But I know that if I do, it will be someone who's proven themselves trustworthy over time, someone who chooses honesty over convenience, someone who would never sacrifice my well-being for their own benefit. That sounds like wisdom gained through painful experience. It is. And maybe that wisdom is worth something, even if I wouldn't choose to learn it the way I did. Marcus taught me that some people are capable of elaborate deceptions that can destroy innocent lives, that love can be weaponized by someone you trust completely, and that the justice system sometimes fails in ways that cost years of freedom to people who've done nothing wrong. But he also taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, that I can survive betrayals that once would have seemed impossible to endure, and that building a life based on truth and caution can be more rewarding than one based on blind trust and romantic fantasies. The flowers he brought to my door that evening are long dead, but the lessons I learned from his betrayal continue to guide the choices I make about who to trust, how to protect myself, and what kind of future I want to build. Some apologies can't be accepted because the damage they attempt to address is too fundamental to repair. Some relationships can't be rebuilt because they were never as real as we believed them to be in the first place. Marcus asked me to forgive him and marry him, but the woman he was asking no longer existed. She died when he faked his death, was buried during the 2 years I spent in prison for his murder, and will never be resurrected by his belated confessions or convenient remorse. The woman I am now knows better than to trust someone who's already proven himself capable of destroying her life for his own convenience. And that knowledge, painful as it was to acquire, has made me wiser, stronger, and ultimately more capable of protecting the new life I'm building from the ashes of the old one.